really nice moderator for my Discord, and he set it up. Unfortunately, he's not online right now, and my knowledge of how to use this program is very, very limited. So I'm really, really sorry about that. Just make sure that everyone's had the chance to move across. I think, okay, there's 8 people who are probably idle in the other chat, but we're going to start without them. So feel free to start recording now. Really, really sorry for technical delays. Let's go and get into talking about some League of Legends. Okay, so. Before we even start talking about League of Legends, let's have a little bit of a talk about what kind of a game League of Legends is. So, when we want to talk about how we're analyzing League of Legends, and we want to have a think about what kind of a game this is. The game is played differently on a pro level to a solo queue level, but essentially what we're looking at when we talk about League of Legends is that there's 4 categories which essentially split up League of Legends versus other types of games. The first is a team focused game. Second is that it's hidden information, which is a lot of what we're going to be talking about today. So hidden information. Second is it's a resource distribution game, and I'll go and talk about what all of these mean afterwards. And fourthly, it's what we call like a worker placement game, which is a type of resource distribution game. So worker distribution. Okay, so let's go and have a look. Let's think about as a whole, what is the worker distribution? Okay, so let's have a think about what kind of game this means, and what are the qualities of these kinds of games when we talk about these kinds of games. So obviously a team focused game is pretty clear. It's a game which rewards communication, teamwork, that kind of thing. Hidden information is a game. It tends to be games, such as poker, such as Magic the Gathering, real-time strategy games, right? And what a hidden information game is it's a game where you don't know. If you think about you're playing a game of Texas Hold'em or something like this, you don't know what the enemy is setting up to do. I mean, you can play for vision in the game, and we're going to talk about this. But hidden information, whereas a team focused game is pretty easy, what really matters in a team focused game is your communication, your coordination as a unit. What matters in hidden information games is how you balance risk versus reward, right? Often, when you're playing a hidden information game and you're playing against the same opponent, let's use poker as an example for this. If you know every single time how your opponent is going to play every single time in a game of poker, it becomes very easy to beat them, right? But in a hidden information game, when you're talking about balancing risk versus reward, the key thing here is every single action you take in a hidden information game is about balancing risk versus balancing reward, and you can break this balance either by improving the amount of reward you get for each individual action you take, or about minimizing risk. Okay, and we're going to talk mainly today, because we're going to be talking about aggressive play in League of Legends. We're going to mainly be talking about reward without changing risk. Okay. What do we mean by resource distribution game? It's about you have a limited finite amount of resources in a game of League of Legends. Now, in a game of League of Legends, that finite amount of resources is gold. It's gold and it's experience. But the key thing is that in a game of League of Legends, resources are not stable, right? The amount of gold is not the same value on all individual champions at all times of the game. 300 gold on your top lane carry or first blood is going to be worth more than gold on your support. But at the same time, if that 300 gold is what secures your supporter's second item, it may be worth more in an isolated window than an individual carry. And this is why, for instance, you will see as teams have gone more and more into playoffs, and you've seen the stronger teams coming up, the ability to automatically have gold and to be able to reassign gold as you becomes more and more important as we go into playoffs, right? So one of the things which maybe you've seen in the season that some people have argued a lot for is, for instance, on Herald swaps, right? Which is when the enemy team chooses to go to Herald, um, you as the bot lane, with most in most situations, have the ability to go and push bot and choose to ignore the Herald rotation, right? Choosing to get more individual experience over yourself as a team, whereas the enemy team goes and gets Herald. But why, for instance, in the LCK finals, are you seeing teams having 10-person fights over Herald in the early game? It's because the ability to contest Herald means that you can choose to reassign the gold that you're going to get from Herald by using it on plates towards a character which is going to have more value from the gold than a larger absolute amount that the AD carry may be able to get, right? Because AD carry's usage of gold in the early game is generally the value of that gold in helping you win early skirmishes, early fights is less, having 400 gold on AD carry, maybe less than having 300 gold on the top lane Renekton, right? So assigning your gold and assigning your resources is something which is really, really important in the game, and we're going to talk about that in a sec. Okay, the final thing when we talk about worker distribution or worker placement games. Okay, so in a game of League of Legends, you have individual pieces. Some of this you can select. Some of this you can select through draft, which is pretty easy. But also some of this is some of this is also individual player skill, right? So what does that mean when we're talking about coaching goals for each of these individual topics, right? When we're talking about team focus game, right? First thing we want to talk about is pretty easy. It's about communication. It's about making sure that everyone's on the same, follows the same game plan. Everyone is, your team fighting as a unit. You're playing. You're making decisions. You're choosing which waves you contest. You're choosing which objectives you contest as the same unit. Worker distribution is pretty simple. It's about improving your individual mechanics. It's about improving your laning. It's about improving your ability to execute on the champions that you pick. But what does this have to do with hidden information and resource distribution game? And that's the main focus of what I'm going to be talking about. What I'm going to be talking about today. Okay, so this is the premise that I'm going to be working on. These are the 4 things that define a game of League of Legends, and how we identify these and how we identify our goals in each of these categories as coaches define how we want to go about coaching each individual category. Okay. So I'm going to keep coming back to this, but let's have a look at a little bit more at what I mean by hidden information and what I mean a little bit by balancing risk versus reward in a hidden information game. I apologize, but it seems that somebody is strangling one of my academy players. Okay, so let's go and have a look at hidden information. And the thing you need to know about hidden information, the key thing that we want to talk about in this kind of an area is thinking about balancing risk versus reward. And the best way that I can kind of explain this is to think about the difference between balancing risk versus reward in a solo queue game versus balancing risk versus reward in a competitive game. And in a pro League of Legends game. So, hypothetical situation. You are a top laner. Okay. Right now, you have the option to get a really good buy right now. You have the option to get a really, really good buy right now, but your wave is frozen in front of enemy tower. You have no idea where the enemy jungle is. He could be here, he could be here, he could be anywhere of the map. So for whatever reason, you've lost track of enemy jungle. And you have to make the decision about whether you try to flip it for this wave or whether you don't. So if you base right now, you can get your really good buy, you can get a really big power spike, but in the time it takes you to base, come back to lane, because you don't have TP, you are going to lose about 2 minion waves versus CS. Maybe your buy is enough, but if you're able to bounce this wave, you're able to push the wave in, not only are you going to be able to base with a really powerful buy, but by the time you get back, the wave is going to be frozen in front of your tower, and you're going to be much, much stronger than the enemy top laner, or enemy top laner is just going to clear the wave, he's going to base, and he's going to match your back. Okay, so both of you are going to be neutral. So you have the option to take a small win, or you have the option to take a large win based on how aggressive you want to go and play this situation. Now, let's just assume that if you clear the wave, an enemy jungle is here, he's just going to kill you, right? Okay, so you're going to die. So in a game of solo queue, your analysis, so it's clear what the risk is, right? The risk is that the enemy jungler is going to come here and he's going to come and kill you. 1 second, I just need to tell my academy team to stop killing each other. 1 second. Okay, it's okay, so where was I? Okay, so we were talking about risk versus reward calculation, right? So your risk versus reward calculation in this situation is your risk is you get ganked and you get killed. Your reward is you could take a small victory by pushing in your wave, or you could take a lot by just basing and giving up the freeze, or you could take a large victory by managing to get the bounce and back. Now, in solo queue, generally, your assessment of whether you should take this risk in order for your reward is based on your individual situation in game as an individual, um, as an individual champion. Okay. Now, in competitive, your assessment of what you can do as a team is different, and we're gonna. So in solo queue, your risk versus reward looks something like uh, this, as in the closer your jungler is to you, the less risky it is for you to push it. Okay, so your risk versus reward graph, it looks something like this, right? If your jungler's right here, you can push it in together. You don't have to take any risk. If your jungler is here farming this camp, obviously it's going to be high risk for a potential high reward. So that's solo queue. You measure that risk versus reward as an individual. Now in competitive, it's completely different. In competitive, you measure your risk versus reward and you analyze risk versus reward as a team. So, what do I mean from this? Imagine a hypothetical situation where you're in the same situation in competitive and you have push mid. Okay. Now, of course, in a situation where you have push mid, you can just ask your mid laner to fog into top maybe and preserve you. Okay. But we're going to talk about why that's not always the optimal play later when we talk about aggression. But let's say you push mid. Okay. And your jungler's on the other side of the map. If in this kind of situation, let's say you push in the wave, you get ganked, but you've already cleared the wave. The enemy, if you have push mid and your jungler's on the other side of the map, you have the option to cross map here, and sure they get to kill here top, but you're going to deny a huge amount of CS from enemy bot lane, right? So your risk versus reward calculation is different, right? In that it's safe for you to go and push in, although you may lose an individual advantage, your team as a whole is going to gain something which is at least equal to this, and you're still going to get your back, right? If you don't have push mid, so everything is easy when you have push mid. You know, push mid is really OP in pro play. But if you don't have push mid, the situation is different, right? If you don't have push mid and you want to go and make the same play, and your jungler's on the bottom side of the map, what your jungler's probably going to have to do is he's going to have to come mid, and he's going to have to gank mid, and then the two of them can path into here. They don't have to complete the rotation. They just have to threaten. They just have to threaten to do something on the bot lane to get these guys to back off so that you deny. But of course, what's going to happen is when your jungler shows mid, these guys, the first thing that these guys are going to do is they're going to all in for the wave as aggressively as they can because we're in a pro game and they're not stupid. If they know their jungler show top and enemy jungle just ganked mid and starts pathing into bot, they're probably going to be dove, right? So they're going to be forced to go and push the wave. But what this means is that your potential risk versus reward, like the risk, which is a low risk play when you have mid push, becomes a low to mid tier risk based on what the position of your wave is, right? So you have the same risk reward versus reward calculation, say if your wave is here, or if your wave is pathing into bot, or you've got the wave frozen in front of your bot tower, because then you can come and push the wave, and these guys are going to be forced to back off. But if the wave is near enemy tower, and they're contesting you aggressively, let's say your minion wave is here, then these guys are just going to all in the wave, and they're just going to base, right? So you're not going to have that cross map threat. Okay, so the way that what this is called in gambling circles is something called hedging. Okay, and hedging is very important. Is one of the core concepts to think about when we're talking about coaching aggressive play, because if you're playing for proactive early game play in the early game, you can't play for every 100% play, which means that you need to look for situations where you can mitigate your risk. And of course, if the jungle doesn't gank here and you're able to push your wave in as an individual, you're still going to come up with that big advantage, right? This is only in the worst case scenario if you get punished for taking your risk, right? Your risk versus reward calculation is not done by as an individual like it is in solo queue. So in fact, if we think about a situation where we have mid push, right? And in solo queue, I talked about risk versus reward, which is basically the further your jungler is away, the higher the risk is for you to go and try to push this wave in. But in a situation, hypothetical situation where you have mid push, if your jungler is here, it's the same kind of low risk situation. But the curve goes something like this. Ugh, that's a really rubbish drawing. But your curve is not so much, it's something like this where it goes down. Okay. With these lines that I've drawn, this line here is line A, and this is line B. So we're still in the basics for now, right? And this is line B. Okay, so the highest risk situation in the game of competitive where you can be punished. So if your jungler is within zone A here, obviously he can push the wave in with you, right? In a 2v2 situation. If your jungler is here, past zone B, he can, and we have mid push, you can always threaten the cross map play, which is going to deny an equal amount to what you would lose on the other side. But the highest risk situation for you as a team is you decide to flip it for this wave when your jungler is in the situation of pathing up into top. So he's heading into top already, and you try to flip it, and the enemy jungle kills you before your jungler arrives. Because now your jungler is already pathing into here, and you've died. So now not only did you die and give up your wave state, but also now you have no cross map threat, right? And this is really this is the key principle on which hedging rests, right? It's that you can take more risks and you can take higher value risks. Sure, it's not going to be a low risk play, right? Which is where your jungler is here, but you can go a play which may look like a high risk play becomes a medium risk play based on what your threat level is on the other side of the map. Okay, and this is the key principle on everything else which I'm going to be discussing today. Whereas the main high risk situation is not that your team is far away from you. It's that your team is already positioning in a position to salvage your play, right? And if your team is trying to salvage your play or trying to rescue you, and you die before the play is completed and they're pathing into top, what's the enemy team going to do? Not only do you die on your strong side, but enemy team, obviously, when they see you pathing into top, is going to path into this side. So you die on this side as well, right? So this goes from a play which would be ordinarily just bad for one lane to being a play which is bad for multiple lanes on the map. Okay. And this is kind of why you see the situation here being the really high risk play, right? So normally you would back off in this kind of a situation, wait for your jungler to path top, and then go and push up together. Okay, so number one principle. This is something that is called hedging. So I'm gonna just show an example. So hedging can take many different forms. So I'm just gonna show two examples of hedging. So let's get my first photo. Okay, so this is an example. So hedging is normally pretty difficult to see because it's about opportunities that you can take, and it's about opportunities that you miss to go and take risks. So I'm going to show an example from a G2 versus Misfits game where Wonder, who's playing Renekton inside this game, is going to make an aggressive play, but he's going to do it based on the cross map threat. And the reason why we can see that this play doesn't work out is because it's his teammates mess it up. But normally, a typical observer from the game will go and look at this game and they say, okay, Wonder's just trolling here. He's playing aggressive on weak side. But really, it's the strong side punish, which is what ends up in this play failing. So I'm just going to have a quick look. I should have really closed these for ads. And we're going to have to rewind in a second. I'm going to put 2x speed. Okay, I'm going to have to go. Let me open all of these somewhere else so that we don't have to go and watch through all of these ads. I should get an ad blocker. Okay, I will make sure that none of these ads play on. I get a lot of ads. Apparently, I'm being targeted for this reason. Okay.
I have YouTube Premium. You could log in as me if you want.
It's fine. I'll just go to open all of the windows. Like we'll probably take a short break in about 15 minutes, and I'll just open all the rest of my thoughts. But thank you for offering. Okay, so pretty standard situation. So Wanda here is going to be on Renekton. We're going to come and talk a little bit more about Renekton later. But here he's going to make an aggressive player weak side when he sees mid and support. He knows mid and support. They just came out of base, right? So they don't need to base right now. They're going to go and path into top, and he's going to go and die. But because of his cross map situation, it doesn't actually matter that he goes and dies. What matters is how his team punishes on the other side of the map. So this is pretty standard hedging. So he's playing really, really aggressive. He knows that they're pathing in towards him because he saw them leave the minion wave, but he still decides to flip it, tries to cheat the wave on weak side, and now he's going to try to run away, right? Because he knows that if he gets punished, firstly, he's a Renekton, he has flash and he has ult. So enemy team is not going to be able to just send one person. They're going to have to send multiple people into his lane, which means his team is even in a situation where he doesn't die. Great, he pushes out the wave. He's going to get to base and come mid, or he's going to come and get to rotate to mid, right? But in a situation where he does get punished, the fact that he took this risk is mitigated by the fact that now he knows that they're going to need basically three people to come and answer him, which means that his teammates are going to be able to push mid and push bot and get equal or more resources on the other side um, of the map. Okay, so how long will this be? This is going to be about an hour in total. Um, okay, so obviously here Wanda gets punished, but you see on the other side of the map equivalent resources is gone. It can be acquired, right? Now this player ends up in a complete disaster. And why does this player end up in a complete disaster? It's because Jankos isn't pushing the tower, right? So obviously in this situation, Jankos and Ryze and Olaf should be hitting the tower together, and they farm the jungle camps on the way out, and then they would be able to get out reasonably quickly, right? So they would get equivalent on the other side of the map. They push mid, push bot, and they would be able to get something with Olaf being able to get out. But because Olaf is taking the jungle camps, this play ends up as a complete disaster. But you can see this is a pretty standard example of hedging, right? Like he can make the aggressive play on this side of the map even when he knows resources are being allocated into him because of the cross map threat and the fact that he knows that his teammates are going to be able to acquire at least as much if he goes and plays into the side of the map. Pretty standard situation. Okay. Um, let's have another look at hedging. I'm just gonna have to open. I'm not gonna put this here. We're gonna have a look at. Okay. Oh, this one for whatever reason opened immediately. Okay. Okay. Similar situation. So this is also similarly about weak side play. Right. So G2 have push mid. They're going to come and threaten to go and dive bot. Okay. But what I want to highlight on this play is about the difference in threat, cross-map threat that you can hedge against. Okay, and I want to highlight each individual wave and talk about the three waves here where Kazi is going to make play on weak side, and is going to change his aggression based on his cross-map threat and his ability to play to his team's ability to cross-map threat away from him. Okay, so for Mad Lions bot lane. Okay. So pretty standard situation in game. G2 have mid push. They're gonna threaten to play mid into bot. So right now they know that I think Yankos was mid. They or no, sorry, they saw Mickey mid. They saw enemy support mid. So they know now that there's a high chance that with mid push, given that top lane isn't easily going to be punished, there's a high chance that this is going to be top into mid. But on this one wave, they're safe to go and aggressively attack the wave as much as they want because they have numbers equivalency, right? Even though they don't have mid, even though G2 have mid push, it's going to take them one wave to be able to come and rotate into bot. Okay. Second thing is they know that if enemy team does path into bot, their jungler's on the top side and he has Herald. So they can afford to play really, really aggressively right now because if they are punished right now, then the cross map threat, the hedge, is going to get at least as much, if not more, resources based on the enemy jungle show. So they come and push the wave, they kind of cheat the wave a bit, but now LeBlanc goes and disappears from mid, and now they're coming back off. Okay, so right now, this is a roam which has been aggressively. So they've attacked the wave, and now they back off completely. So why are they backing off completely now? It's because now this trade has already been won. Okay, because they cheated the wave, and top tower is now going to fall for this based on the fact that enemy team is allocating resources into bot. So now it's a high risk situation because this trade here, this top tower for Roam bot is going to be is already a one trade. But they're now going to go back. So on the 11-minute wave, on this wave here, they back off. So now this is being played really, really on the limit. Okay. But right now, at this situation, on this 11:30 wave, the resources, so the cross map resources that allow them to take to play up and really, really aggressive like this still exist on the map. So now they back off and play safe because the trade has already been won, but they're going to go and challenge the next wave. So what about the 12-minute wave is different from the 11:30 wave? Okay. So right now, this is a trade that's already been won. But why now do they come and step forward? It's because firstly, they have additional resources to come and support. But now this is the start of a new trade, right? So they've already won this trade already because enemy they played aggressively for the wave. They were able to cheat it a little bit and back off because they knew resources were being allocated into mid. But now on the other side of the map, enemy team pushes, they back off, and then they recontest at 12 minutes once more threat exists, right? So the longer that these guys remain here, the longer that multiple resources are allocated on this side of the map, the more this wave here and this wave here can be pushed in. And when the TP is put in, they can now play as aggressively as they want, right? But the key thing is that the aggression takes place when there is cross-map threat. Okay, so at 11 minutes, they had the threat, on the 11-minute wave, they had the threat of Herald being used cross-map. On the 11:30 wave, they'd already taken the tower, so they had no cross-map threat. On the 12-minute wave, they have additional resources being reallocated into them, TP advantage, etc. But they can afford to play more aggressively because now, again, on the 12-minute, they've already killed the top tower, but on the 12-minute wave, if the enemy continues to allocate 3 to 4 members on bot, they're going to get plates, they're going to deny CS, they're going to get everything on the other side. Okay, and this is the concept. This is concept of variable risk, right? And that is the concept of variable risk is that the concept of variable risk is just comes back to the similar situation, which is your ability to take risky actions. The risk reward balance is based on what your team has to do on the other side of the map. Right? Pretty simple concept. I'm sure most of you guys, as coaches, understand this concept. Okay, so maybe I can show one more example just to get this thing through. I guess I can show the example that Azael did on EG. Please don't have ads. Please don't have ads. Okay. So we're gonna go and talk about the. Okay, there are lots of ads, but there's no reason for everyone here to talk. And then we're going to talk a little bit about how we go and coach that, and about principles of aggression. Oh, we've already been going for half an hour, so I better keep talking quickly because I feel that we're still on reasonably basic stuff right now. Okay, so this is a situation which I think was covered on the LCS broadcast. It's a situation where bot lane has full push. Enemy lost jungle here, and Ryze is pathing top because he assumes enemy bot is going to path into bot. Okay, so this is essentially using the fact that you hit towers really, really hard with Tristana to threaten to go for a more aggressive play on the other side of the map, based on the fact that you know that if you're punished here on this side of the map, you're going to get equal or more resources on the other side of the map. Okay, so this is pretty similar situation. So he's here, Jizuke is just out of position. He ends up going and dying, and obviously one of the reasons why I'm doing a presentation like this is because a lot of people are just assuming, okay, this is just an int play, right? But here, this play would normally be an int play if Tristana was in base, and Tristana wasn't threatening cross map, then this is an int play. But because there's cross map threat, it turns out to be a perfectly fine play. And the amount of resources which are allocated into top versus what is given as a reward bot makes this a good trade. Okay. However, we now go to the continuation of the play. Okay, and the continuation of this play here is a situation where you have multiple people on enemy strong side positioning up in order to go and cross map this herald. But again, as the tower is being killed, the threat is not worth here contesting, right? But when this, so you see red team back off, right? Red team backs off now because there's no cross map threat, right? But as soon as the tower is gone, it's natural the blue team will want to recall and come and defend the tower. So now you can, by the same token, continue to play aggressively on this next wave once this tower is gone, because now you're initiating a new trade with new parameters, right? Like new abilities to come and trade. So here it works out not so good for red team. I mean, but the key thing is red team can play aggressively here because they know that this threat exists on the other side. Okay. Um, and basically, red team is just wasting blue team's time. But the key point about all of this is, okay, so they overextend right now, but they can afford to overextend without there being any, like, this is a high risk play, high risk, high reward play, because there's the threat of getting the bot tower by itself. But this is not really a high risk. This is like a medium risk or low to medium risk based on the situation on the other side of the map. If this was in solo queue, this is like a high risk, high reward. But this is like a medium risk, high reward. So you're breaking the symmetry based on your cross map threat. Okay. And this is kind of the framework which I kind of want to use. The framework which I kind of want to use to go and discuss this concept. Okay. Number one concept. Okay, so that's about hidden information, and that's about variable risk. Let's have a little bit of a talk about tempo and where this kind of plays into this. So I come from a game design background, and the way that we use tempo in League of Legends is really, really weird to me as somebody who comes from a board game background. Because the way that tempo is used in League of Legends is to discuss one team has tempo and one team doesn't have tempo, right? And I've long wondered why this is, because normally in most games, tempo isn't something you have, right? Tempo is essentially a sliding scale. So getting some amount of reward, or taking some amount of action in a board game, resource distribution game, for instance, cost you an amount of tempo for which you get a reward. But tempo is essentially a sliding scale. I'm just going to use arbitrary numbers. Let's call it 0 and 10, right? Between 0 and 10. So taking an action, let's say your blue team, taking an action costs you an amount of tempo, which is measured in seconds, but it's arbitrary. Let's not go into too much details on this. And you pass, but and therefore this amount of action costs you an amount, and then normally enemy team will then take an action which will give you the tempo lead. And normally the team that has the tempo lead, with most people I've spoken about from a League of Legends background, they say this team has tempo, right? So when the tempo meter is here, this team has tempo, and it passes to the other team, enemy team has tempo. Now, this is not how it's used in most games, right? In most games, you have a sliding scale of tempo, and one team has a tempo advantage. Personally, I call it initiative. I don't know what other teams call it, but if you have the tempo advantage, I think that I normally call it initiative, and if enemy team has tempo advantage, like enemy team has initiative, right? And I think I don't really know why terminology has been used for this. Because basically the way that I've heard it maybe described when I've talked to a lot of Korean coaches is there's the idea, this concept in mid game or early game of taking turns, right? So you take a turn essentially. So you have tempo, you give it to the enemy team, and then they have a turn, and then you have a turn, and vice versa. But the thing is that turns in League of Legends aren't equal. Okay, like the amount of time, if you have enough of a tempo advantage, you can sometimes take an action and still hold initiative. You can still hold the tempo advantage. So you're not just necessarily passing it. It's not necessarily about turns. Okay, it's about and let me give an example of this. So let's consider a pretty simple situation, right? Which is where you have the option to take a tier 1 tower, right? Versus you have the option to take a tier 2 tower. What is an individual kind of turn for somebody who is taking tier 1 tower? This is a turn which costs very little tempo, right? And this is why I think it's useful to talk about tempo in terms of a sliding scale and not in terms of a qualitative assessment, right? It's not a case of one team has tempo, one team doesn't, right? Because if you talk about tempo as a sliding scale, then this also fits into hedging, which we're going to talk about before, right? Which is that your tempo cost for taking a tier 1 tower is you pushed in, you've taken the tower, and you back off, right? That's essentially what the tempo cost of taking this tower was. It doesn't have to be just going back in recalling. It can also be going back to contesting midway, right? When you're playing through the side. But if you think about this as contesting through it, pushing a tier 2 tower, it's not just about pushing the wave further. It's not just from a neutral position. It's not just about taking the tier 2 tower, right? Because you can't just take the tier 2 tower and then come back here to reset if you don't see where anyone else is on the map. You're going to have to come all the way back here into safe ground in order to be able to do it. And often you can't just come to mid, right? Often you have to go and take the safe path round to mid. So the play is not just, it's not twice as much that you're investing, right? You're investing much, much, much more tempo because it's about the original part of your play and then the reset part of your play to get into a defensive position for the enemy team, right? This is just an example of how turns can cost different amount of tempo. Okay, so that's why I've tend to find it useful to talk about initiative when we're talking about tempo instead of that kind of thing. So number one. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about hedging. We've talked a little bit about tempo, and if we go back to have a look at the Cloud9 versus EG step, what's essentially happening here in this step is that the red team in this kind of situation are playing to extend the tempo cost of blue's response to red team's play, right? So if we just go and think about it here, so red team made a play, and now blue team wants to make a counterplay, but what red team is trying to do is turn what should be a reasonably short counterplay into a long counterplay, which maybe means in the future that red team is going to now be able to take 2 plays for the cost of what should be one blue team play, right? Because normally blue team thinks that they're going to use this amount of tempo, but if they end up using this, maybe red team is going to be able to contest this and still maintain initiative, right? Which means they're going to be able to take 2 plays. Okay, and contesting on the end of an individual play is just one part. It's just one part of 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 playing with staggered tempo. Okay, so all of this fits into our discussion when we talk about playing. Yeah, I mean to just read the chat, what you're saying, Trap, is true, right? Because it's not that G2 are extending their play, it's that they are extending the cross map play of the enemy team by not letting them base. Right? So they're taking, so often you'll find somebody like a Pike on that G2 or Rakan or another champion positioning as aggressively as they possibly can, knowing that they could die in order to maintain and hold initiative for as long as they can by extending the amount of time that the enemy team has to reset and therefore pass turn to the other team. Okay. Um, so I think that's a good way of talking about it. So if we're going and looking at how G2 play the game, this is an example of it. Okay, so having understanding these 2 concepts is the key to what I'm going to talk about next. And I'm fully aware that I've taken about 40 minutes, so I'm going to try to not go into too much detail on this. Okay, so I've enticed a lot of people here to talk about aggression and playing for early game, and I think it's interesting in talking about what is aggression and what does it mean to play for early game. And for our coaching priorities when we're trying to teach new players or veteran players about these kind of concepts. And I guess I can just refresh this. Okay. So if you think about when we're talking about aggression, okay, there's an early game, we're talking about 3 things. Okay. First principle that's important, which I talked about earlier, is not all gold is equal on all characters, right? So you want to go and think about how you're going to allocate resources onto your champions which are going strong. We're going to talk about that first. Second thing is by having a more aggressive style of game, if you want to go and condense the game, maybe if people play games like Hearthstone or Magic the Gathering or something like this, maybe it's easier to come and explain in these terms, right? The idea of like an aggro deck, face hunter deck in Hearthstone, or like a mono red deck in Magic the Gathering, is to create a situation where the game is condensed so there are fewer decisions which take place inside a game. But each of those decisions becomes more important to the context of the game. Okay, so an example but the idea is that by condensing the game and making each of those decisions more important, by playing and putting all your resources into a strategy which benefits from which benefits from condensing the games, you put yourself in those decision tree situations, in a situation where you are favored on each of the chances that you try to take. Right? You can't secure a 100% play, but you can secure multiple. Uh, you will try to force multiple decision trees early on in the game, where you are favored. Maybe not heavily favored, maybe not 80-20 favored, but 60-40 favored. And by forcing enough decisions when you are strong, or enough decision trees, you can create a situation where you could get enough cumulative advantages by getting enough advantages on each of those individual plays that you can get enough of a lead that the fact that your opponent outscales you later doesn't matter, because you're extending every single time you get a lead, you're extending the period of time where you are stronger than the enemy team. Okay, so first thing that's important, okay, is number one, when we're talking about drafting for early game aggression, we need to draft particular drafts that give us opportunities to make favorable trades. Number one. Number two, we want to increase the number of situations where decision trees need to be processed, right? Number three, we want to make sure that we have advantages in isolated incidents. Number four, we want to be able to determine when and where situations are fought. And number five, when we're assessing aggressive play, and we're gonna go and assess a game afterwards about this. Aggressive early game play, we shouldn't only be looking at the success of the individual plays that happen, but individual opportunities to force a decision tree being missed as mistakes. And I think that that's something that as a community, both as a coaching staff community and as a caster community and as an analytical community, that we don't look enough at situations where abilities to force a decision tree are missed. Okay, so let's go back to this situation earlier. So remember earlier on in the game, earlier on in our discussion, we had a talk about enemy team having blue team, blue wave was frozen top. So why doesn't if blue team has mid push, why doesn't blue team just send their mid laner top? Okay, if they're the aggressive early game team. And if you are a team that outscales, and and you're this is say a Camille or something, and you want to make sure that he has a smooth transition into the mid to late game, then this is often the right play, right? You just fog into top. There's no need to go and take a risk in a situation where you don't need to take a risk. However, by choosing to move top on your roam timer here, choosing to fog into top, this guy's now going to be able to push out the wave, right? Which means you miss an opportunity where you could have done something else, right? The action of fogging into top is not free. It may look free to somebody who's watching the game, but you, instead of moving top here, you could have fogged into bot to get these guys to play more passively. You could have attacked enemy jungle. You could have harassed this guy on the tower. You can hit his tower. You can go for plays, right? So, why are you taking a risk in a situation where you don't necessarily need to take a risk? The reason why you may choose to provoke a trade like this, where you choose to take a risk, is because by moving, you force a situation where you had an opportunity to make a play which didn't work out. So I'm just going to show an example of this. I'm going to just open it up in the background. Oh, sweet. We don't have adverts. Okay. So aggression as aggression as missed opportunity. I just see that the ads is coming on the bottom of the screen. Okay. So basically, I'm sorry to all of those people who are in this chat who did the I'm limited by how many case studies I can talk about, because obviously I have a responsibility to EG and I can't give away all of EG's secrets, right? Like on this side. But I can talk about situations which I've already talked about publicly. And this is the case study. If any of you EG opened up their application process last off season after we'd selected Turtle from not like Turtle is in our jungle coach from the process, and we opened it up so that other people could see what kind of things we were talking about. Okay, so this is an example. This is basically the case study that was used in our interview last year, which was open up, and hopefully I responded to most of the people who replied. But for the people who didn't do that exercise, I'm going to talk through this exercise here with you. Okay, and this comes a lot to do with coaching a lot of these aggressive concepts and missed opportunities as failures that I'm kind of want to talk about here in this session, in this seminar. Okay, I'm trying to keep this to within 15 minutes. Okay, so pretty standard situation in game. So the question that was asked was about focusing on I can't remember the exact topic, but the key thing that he, well the key thing that people were supposed to recognize here in a situation like this is what is the big mistake that G2 do, and the clue here, it's not them dying 2v2, right? If you're reviewing this game as a coach, talking about this individual 2v2 death is completely useless unless it happens every single game, right? So what do you see here with the G2 draft? This is a draft that must snowball. They get outscaled in pretty much every lane. Personally, I don't like this draft very much, but whether what the qualities of the draft is are completely irrelevant for this game, right? What is clear is that this is a team comp that needs to snowball the game against this team comp, or they're going to get outscaled very, very quickly, which means that every single opportunity to make a play needs to be maximized. Okay, so right now, G2 die 2v2 bot. Okay, it's annoying. He probably thought, oh, Renekton has TP advantage, my jungler's bot, and then he just misjudged the damage of these two champions. It happens, right? Like these kind of things are not really worth dwelling on in review. However, this is where the problem comes. Okay, so Rakan is going to respawn, and Rakan is going to come straight mid right now, and is going to come mid so that G2 get priority on the 530 wave. And so by fogging in here on the 530 wave, there is an opportunity for Silas, who has a stack. He can choose to stack, like this wave is pushing away from him, but he can choose to crash it at 530, or he can choose to crash it at 6. Okay, but the decision that's made from Rakan to come in at 530 is basically almost a game-losing decision, because by choosing to get priority on this 530 wave, there's nothing that can be done with the priority when the priority is established, right? Because you're going to have a look here. Ordinarily, there would be three things you could do with the mid priority, right? Number one, you can use mid priority to get deep vision, but the deep vision is useless because they know where Hecarim is already. Number two situation is they can use mid prior and transfer into top. But they're too late to do anything on top because GP is already going to have crashed this wave and the wave is pushing back. So if they want to make a play on top, either they need a priority at 5 minutes so Silas can come top and reinforce the freeze for Renekton, or they need priority in 6 minutes. So I'm going to play in a second, right? So that you guys can see all of this through. Secondly, getting priority on the 530 wave could sometimes be used as mid into bot and threatening the bot dive. But here, Lucian has low resources and is going to need to base. So this 530 priority is completely useless. And the fact that they go and contest this 530 priority means that they can't get a 6-minute priority or 6-minute 30 priority because the wave stack that they have is now reduced. So the cost for TF to follow is much less than it would be if they were in a position to stack this way. And this kind of thing is really, really important when we're kind of assessing what is good aggressive play and what is bad aggressive play. It's about maximizing the tempo cost because you're the first team that gets to choose to make a trade if you're playing the early game team, and therefore you can often make a play, and the length of time for your play is normally pretty constant. But the whole point about playing for aggressive early game is you want to extend the time or extend the cost for the enemy team to match the tempo length of time for their cross map play that the enemy team takes. Okay, and this is like a big mistake that's going to happen in this game. Okay, so right now, remember, what is the point of this priority? And if you go and choose to play for this priority, what are you going and doing with this priority on the two sides? And these kind of things are like really, really crushing mistakes, which I don't think get covered enough. Okay. Yeah, so they go and choose to get priority on this wave. I think they go and transfer this into no, I think it's 530. They went to push the 530 wave because it's canon, and they push together, and then they go position up. Okay, but this Rakan wasn't needed here. So what could have Rakan done instead? So here it ends up, all that they get in response is a ward here, which is immediately swept, and now they've lost the ability to go and stack another wave in. I will go and say that this is another example of variable risk, which is right now Renekton knows that Hecarim is on the top side. But what is Renekton doing? He's playing like a psychopath on the top side of the map because he knows he's about to hit 6. He knows he has flash. And so, same concept, variable risk concept we were talking about before. He knows that if Hecarim comes and ganks him top, maybe he can kill somebody because he's level 6 Renekton. But it doesn't matter. Even if he does get punished for playing aggressively, look at the bot wave situation. This bot wave is pushing into him. It's going to turn into a freeze or potential stack or potential drag. So Renekton can play aggressively right now and force more trades and force more all-ins, because even though he knows um, Hecarim is top, because of the map state right now and the position of the waves, Hecarim doesn't provide a credible threat to him, because um, red team is going to lose much more if he comes to play stop. But anyway, I'm getting sidetracked, right? The point is that this priority achieved nothing, right? Roaming mid here achieved nothing right now. So what else could have Rakan done in that time? Number one, Rakan can choose to come top right now because this wave is now stacking in. So Rakan can come top. They can come and gank the GP. Number one option, pretty standard option. Number two, Rakan can come out bot. And you may be saying, why is Rakan coming out bot? Lucian just wants to push this wave and base. Well, they have TP advantage, right? So Rakan can come out bot and place a TP ward, maybe an alcove, maybe a thing, because the time that you would want to force on bot lane here is 6 minutes, right? Because wave is going to push out, wave is going to push back, and then you can threaten a TP behind. So you can set up for your next play afterwards, and go and contest bot at 6. You can go and make a punish on the freezing wave here at 5, uh, or yeah, or you can maybe go into enemy jungle and place a deep ward for the same principle, right? You've got a TP flag. But the key thing is that you're going to do something at 6 minutes. You're not going to do anything on 5:30. 5:30 is not your timer. It's either 5-minute timer, okay, now, which means that they're coming top right now with Lilia, or it's a 6-minute timer, right, on this bounce, or potentially, let me have a look at the top wave situation. Can they dive top at 6? No, they can't dive. They can't dive top at 6. If they want to dive top at 6, it's priority on the 6:30 wave. But frankly, I don't think that you can stack this until 6:30. No, I don't think you can't stack this at 6:30. So you're with this wave situation, you're either going to have priority on 5:30 or 6, maybe 6:30, but I don't think enemy team is going to give 6:30. So key thing is you want priority on 6 minutes, so you have 30 seconds of time where you can do something else. And coming mid here is not only useless, but it's also detrimental to your future game plan, right? And this is something like, so this was our case study that we used, one of our case studies, and people were asked to assess the situation, right? And I will tell you that the two things that most people said is, number one, Rakan shouldn't die in the 2v2, and number two, this draft is shit. Um, and uh, um, and all of that kind of stuff is completely useless, right? Like if you're an aspiring coach, you come and tell your player, don't die in the 2v2 in review, or like, this draft is really bad, I messed up your draft. What are you gaining from this, right? What matters is that this is a comp which gets heavily outscaled, so they need to take more opportunities to take risk, and whenever they get priority, they need to take more advantages of their priority. Okay, key principle here. Okay, it's not about the individual mistakes in the individual situations. It's about using priority, and it's about punishing enemy cross map priority. Okay, I'm just going to use two examples from one more game, one more EG game from this season, which maybe we can talk about. Let me just see if ads are going to come up. I'm just going to, yeah, okay, I'll just move this. Okay, so let's talk about allocation of resources. So I had to go a long way back. So one of my pet peeves this season is that a lot of people just assume that Shizuki was inting a lot this season when he wasn't actually inting. He was doing cross map plays. But we're going to have a look at an example where Jizuke was inting, and we're going to talk about why that was in it. Okay. So this is a pretty standard situation in the game. This is from the perspective of a coach who wants to prioritize or promote an idea of cross map play. This is like a hard winning play. Okay. So I'm about to show a hard winning play, and then I'm going to show a hard losing a high risk play for low reward, and then a high risk play that is punished, a high risk play for low reward that is punished. So this is a situation from Spring Split. One of the main reasons I'm using EG games is I don't want to upset other people from other teams too much. And as I'm going to say nice things about Shizuka, I'm sure he doesn't like too much. He may. We'll see about it, right? But this is a situation where team is pushed in right now, and enemy team is going to commit 5 people in order to come and respond to this guy, which is basically a game losing play if you're the blue team, right? If you don't, this is an Orianna that has no mana, and blue team is going to commit 5 people to try to go and kill him. If red team understands what they should be doing is they immediately push mid, immediately push bot, and sure, you get a kill, but you've used a TP for it, you've given up a tower, and like, this guy is worthless. He can't do anything on the map, and in fact, even if you just let this guy base, he's not going to be able to base here. He's going to have to go back. So think about what the counterplay is, right? If you're the blue team. If you're the blue team, you can just get mid push, come into bot, look at this nice juicy wave bot, push this into this tower, and you're going to get more than a kill's worth. Okay. But instead, punishing here leads and punishing with 5 people makes the tempo cost for this play exorbitant. It's a hugely damaging tempo play, and the amount that's achieved from this is almost nothing. Right? So this is a situation where, again, this is Jizuke is inting again on broadcast, or just amongst Reddit. But actually, this is a game-winning play, right? Because here this tower is essentially taken with no tempo cost at all, right? Because here, if red team is smart, they're going to push in mid wave, they're going to push in bot wave, and because blue team has allocated 5 people to killing this guy, right? This is obviously 3 people too many, or 2 people too many. And what happens? Mid wave gets pushed in. Bot wave should, in theory, be pushed in. Did we go bot? Yep, bot wave is pushed in. And what is gained in response? A tower is gained, but no mid priority is gained. Nothing is gained here. And in fact, there's numbers disadvantage on the mid wave afterwards because 5 people have been allocated to kill an individual person. Okay, so this is an example of misallocating resources, right? Maybe another example that I can show from the same game, however, but this is because there's a credible cross-map threat. So this is an example of a situation which isn't as good, right? So remember we were talking about hedging as like having cross-map threat, but right now there is no cross-map threat, right? There's multiple people appearing on mid, and maybe you think that this team is going to push here, they're going to come and rotate into here, and they're going to come and rotate into here. But essentially, Oriana is taking a really, really high risk. This is a high risk play to come and clear this way, right? Because it will stop the enemy team. If the enemy team wants to play top intermittent bot, now they have no wave to play on. Okay, but it's a really, really high risk because you're a long way away from your tower and there's very easy potential collapse from here into here. Maybe there's a TP, you could TP your way out, but it's still not worth it, right? So this kind of a play is more risky. Like this is high risk, medium reward, low reward. I mean, I guess the enemy team doesn't have a play on the bottom side. But this kind of play, obviously, you could do the original play before because you have cross-map threat, right? You have mid-wave contested and that kind of thing. Here, you don't have. And it results a similar situation ends up with a death later. Uh, but it's not. But the key thing is not every time. The mistake here is not coming for this wave. The mistake here is coming for this wave when team is resetting, right? So that there's no credible cross map threat. If Graves, Sion, and Alistair are on the mid wave and can push in here, this is actually a fine play because you can threaten to cross map, right? If one person's on this wave, you can threaten to cross map. But it's the positioning of the other players on the team that makes this play weak, right? And if all you're doing in review is criticizing this, then you're not getting to the crux of the problem, right? Which is that the decision to push this wave is not made by this person, right? The decision to push this wave is made by these 5 people, and it's something that you have to acknowledge as a high risk play with a potential high reward, right? And if you go back and have a look at the other situation about this play over here, this is a team core play, right? But the aggressive play that's made here right now is done on the basis of having that hedge on the other side. Okay. So I've already been talking for 1 hour. I guess I'll wrap up a little bit and then we can open the floor. To questions. Okay. So final thing I kind of want to talk about is what do we mean by strong side play and how do we go about coaching like these different concepts, right? And I think that generally, if we talk about strong side versus weak side, right? What I think that the vocabulary of just calling something strong side or just calling something weak side is not really a very helpful vocabulary, right? And the reason why is that generally there's here I really wish that I'd done my I had my presentation so I didn't have to you don't have to see me write on Rifkit. But basically, there's essentially if you're playing strong side, there's one of two things that can happen. Okay, which means that there's 4 outcomes, right? Number one is how does your strong side champion? What does your strong side champion want to do? Does your champion want to play in isolation, or do they want to play team? Like, do they want to group? Second thing is does the champion want to Does your strong side champion want to play for themselves? So let's call it selfish. Or is it actually let's just talk about this as a group, right? Self versus team. Okay. So these are basically the two ways that you assess strong side champions, right? And this essentially means that there's 4 outcomes, right? So what's our terminology for each of these? Firstly, if you're if you want to wait, am I talking about the right thing? Wait, group or isolation. Oh, get your own advantage. So this is your own advantage versus team advantage versus transfer your advantage. Sorry. So it's better to call it own, right? So here, in a situation like this, if we're talking about playing for our own advantage, and group, like this is normally something like you just call it like a win condition. I don't really have a good terminology for this, right? But normally this is just like a win condition or something, right? I don't know. I don't really have a good terminology for this, right? But if you're planning to, if you're planning to transfer your advantage in a group, right? This is something which we call a bridge. If you're playing for your own advantage and you're a champion that thrives in the 1v1, you know, we call this an isolation or a split push. But this is the kind of area that I think isn't studied the most, right? Which is that you can want to play in isolation and you can benefit your team by playing in isolation. So you're playing for team advantage, not your own individual advantage by playing in isolation. And this is what we call a hedge. And I think this is the area that of play that isn't studied enough or isn't discussed enough. We don't have the vocabulary to kind of discuss what is a hedge, right?
Is this stuff
And
like a TF who's really behind, who's just gonna ult out when people collapse on him?
yeah, but normally a TF is a bridge, normally. But yes, but that would be an example of a hedge. But the kind of example of a champion which is a really good hedge, and this is kind of something that I want to talk about with Renekton, okay? Because I know that there's a lot of people out there who think basically Renekton is a trash champion, right? And firstly, in 2021, Renekton is not a trash champion. Like Strybreaker and Gore Drinker are really, really OP. But 2020 Renekton, you can argue that in 2020, Renekton wasn't very strong, right? Because if you think about playing with a Renekton, there's two things. If you only think about Renekton as something which you play on what we would normally call a strong side, right? A strong side being you allocate resources into it and try to snowball the Renekton. Renekton is a champion which falls off at 25 minutes, right? So you better not make a single mistake, right? Like if you're snowballing your Renekton and your 3-0 Renekton gets outscaled by, you know, whatever, like by an Ornn or something like this, or and you're playing the game flawlessly, fine, you win the game, right? But if you make 1 or 2 mistakes, then your Renekton is going to fall off and it's going to be really, really useless. Okay, so playing strong side, if you're gonna play the game flawlessly, why even pick a Renekton in the first place? So number one. If you're gonna use Renekton weak side, then there's other champions which play contain side better. But if you think about Renekton as a hedge, right, then Renekton is something else, right? And this is the key thing about Renekton as a hedge, right? What about Renekton makes Renekton a really good hedge pick? The first thing is you have mobility, so you have the opportunity to force more decision trees on your opponent, right? Number one. Number two, you have sustain, which means that even if you take small losses, you can still continue to keep forcing because you can just sustain yourself up. And three, you have good early game dueling, right? Let's compare this to something like, say, a Darius, right? Darius has better sustain, better dueling. But why is Darius not an effective hedge? Darius doesn't fit as a hedge, right? Darius has to fit in this column here, like a win condition, like your win condition or your bridge, right? And that's because Darius can't convert his advantage easily in the mid game or in the late game against multiple resources, right? Because when you're ganking a Renekton, right? Renekton has ult, Renekton has tons of mobility, he can just get out really easily. And maybe Darius is stronger in the 1v1 or 2v2, but if your Darius is pushing to this tower right here, and you come and you commit 3 people into him, he's dead, right? Like, unless he's super, super fed and can 1v3, in which case the game's already over, right? But if you have a Renekton here and you commit 3 people into this Renekton has a decent chance of being able to get out because he has really high mobility. So he can position much more aggressively. And this is the key thing why in LPL you would see like Renekton being picked where a lot, whereas in LCK, like Renekton had an atrocious win rate in LCK because normally Renekton in LCK was played as a strong side champion. So you use it to snowball your jungler, or you use it to snowball the Renekton himself, right? And that means that you have to play flawlessly, or the Renekton, you make a mistake, Renekton falls off and gets outscaled. But in LPL, the way that Renekton is used is a hedge, right? What does that mean? It's that LPL bot lanes want to play really, really aggressively. And the meta at the time was things like set support. It was things like Pantheon Jin versus like Leona Varus or something, or Leo, So these are lanes which want to all in all the time. But if you had a Renekton, unless the enemy team picked Quinn or some weird other pick like this, Renekton basically beat a lot of the champions 1v1. So in the situation here, if we go back to here, you always had, remember we talked about how if you didn't have mid priority, if you had mid priority, great, you can just play here for free, right? But if you didn't have mid priority, what really mattered is your cross map, because jungler had to come mid. It's the situation of this wave here, right? This wave here that's on here. And Renekton, if you had a Renekton on your team, you could always hedge against bot lane aggression, right? So if you're playing really, really aggressively with your bot lane and you're taking all the trades and you're forcing advantages with your bot lane, it naturally requires a very high risk style of play. Okay, so there's a chance obviously that you can be ganked. But the advantage of having a Renekton is not that you're snowballing the Renekton, it's that every single time the enemy jungler shows bot, you know that if you're not in a position to defend here, you have the option to immediately play into here because Renekton is going to have wave control. So this guy can go and play aggressive. These guys can therefore play more aggressively, knowing that they have the cross map hedge, and that's the key thing which makes Renekton such an OP champion. It's not that you can snowball through him, right? Although, I mean, he's been nerfed a bit recently, right? But when he had Gordrink or like Stridebreaker, you can just like snowball him and like he just carries the game 1v9, right? But this is not what the game was like in 2020, right? But you saw certain teams have really high win rates on Renekton. Okay, and it's not because they had specific win rates on Renekton, it's because they understood what hedging was, right? And that's the key thing that I want to talk about. So when you're talking about things with your team, when you're looking at playing aggressive play, you have and playing for early game, you need to think about strong side, what lane you're playing through, and how you want to play through this lane, right? Are you playing a strong side bridge lane? Are you playing a strong side hedge lane? Are you playing an isolation lanes? I'm just trying to think what would be nice. Like it would be something like Caitlyn Janna, right? You're playing Caitlyn Janna or Caitlyn Morgana, where you don't want to play into the lane so much as you want to just leave the lane isolated, right? So they can punish on the other side. And what would something like this like? Okay, this would be like a Draven Thresh or something would be a good example of a lane that would fit here. Something like Draven Thresh, where you want to just play into the lane and something like this, and then on weak side you have somebody that contains the pressure, right? Like maybe a Mordekaiser or a Maokai or something last season. I can't remember what was strong on weak side last season. Sion, really good example, right? Because then this guy can always play to contain on this side. But this is the key thing. If you're working through this, number one principle, understand variable risk. If you don't understand variable risk, you cannot play aggressive. You cannot play like proactive early game League of Legends, right? Because the problem is that every single time you need to get this priority, if you want to go and relieve this guy, then you're giving up opportunities which otherwise you wouldn't be able to get. Number one. Number two, understand how you want to go and play strong side and understand the differences in setups between different strong sides. Okay. Number two. Number three, in review, don't focus on the individual small mistakes, right? Or when you're setting up a draft and you're trying to play, maybe your Lucian top or something like this. The key thing is that you treat each missed opportunity to roam or missed opportunity to transfer pressure as a mistake that needs to be discussed in review, right? It's not about when you're playing to scale, missed opportunities don't matter. But in early game, you have a limited amount of time to force interaction, and every missed opportunity to force interaction is a mistake. Okay, and that's the key thing to focus on, not the mechanical issues. And then the final point, what was the final point I wanted to say? So I'm just having a quick look at notes. Yeah, and the final point is tempo. So I don't know what terminology other teams want to use, and I don't care what frankly, I don't care. But don't think if you're going to use tempo as a qualitative assessment, right? One team has tempo, or one of the two teams has tempo, right? Blue team has tempo, or red team has tempo. Then find a vocabulary that you can use to incorporate this kind of sliding scale. Because if you just treat tempo as binary, you either have it or you don't, then there's no accounting for the plays that delay the enemy team to try to get you a cumulative tempo advantage over time. And if you're playing the proactive early game opportunity, the big advantage you have is you can constantly calculate the tempo cost for each of your plays, right? Whereas if you're the team that doesn't have the early game priority, the tempo cost for your counterplay is always variable because you don't know what the enemy team is going to do. You don't know how much the tempo cost will be for you making a play. And maybe sometimes you have to, instead of maybe they take your objective, and instead of pushing for their tower back, you go and get deep vision instead, right? Which means that now you having the knowledge of the tempo cost of an individual play is often as valuable, if not more valuable than an objective, but obviously rewards are temporary, right? So it's only a temporary advantage. Okay, and that I think is the key thing to focus on when you're kind of focusing on these kind of things. Okay, so that was an hour and a half. Sorry about the technical issues at the start. I hope that kind of covered a lot of the topics. If there's anything that you want to ask, feel free to ask in the chat. I'll come and respond to it. But if you want to speak, put a like SP at the start, and then I can hand over responsibility. So let me have a quick look. But the thing that I want to go and say for this is I was going to go and put this up so that I can go and have a look at the questions. Oh, that was unfortunate. Okay, so let's go and have a look at some of the questions. Actually, I don't want to risk doing that again. Okay, did he say how long this will be? Thinking about okay. I mean, I'm just listening to somebody who's interested but low key casual. Okay, I think I can be a little bit high risk. Like tempo equals value over time. I think that's fair. This is what Fnatic did to Madden. At least I don't know. So Clampy, I'm not sure what you mean. This is you have to yeah. I mean that's fair. Game 3 goes. Okay. Timo doesn't. Okay. Okay. So there weren't any questions. Okay. Great. I'm glad that everyone kind of understands. Okay. Go ahead and ask Alex. Feel free to just talk. Take the floor, or unless you really want to type.
All right. We're good. All right. So my big question, and don't give more details than you feel comfortable saying, but obviously everything is easier when your team has tempo on the map, regardless of what you want to do. So this would be like kind of an easy example. You talked about a bot lane that wants to isolate as opposed to like sort of play with the team. So let's say you have Ashe Zyra in bot lane, and you have Rift Herald coming up, and you don't necessarily want to move the Zyra up because if Zyra makes a mistake moving through the river, or they have a ward there and you didn't know about it, Zyra can just die. Maybe you just want to like stay there and you want to prevent the enemy support from moving. And that's just like that's just one example. But in this, do you feel that sort of the setup to get to the all these different map situations is roughly the same in terms of how you're getting pressure or how you're placing vision, and that it's just kind of the last 10% in terms of what you do when you get there? Or do you feel like you are having dramatically different setups? Does this make sense?
Your mic is muted if you didn't realize.
Thank you. I didn't realize that could have been really embarrassing. So I think the main thing about talking about an Ashe Zyra setup, right, is that normally if you're playing Ashe Zyra, the value of gold on your Ash Zyra or the opportunity cost for you rotating for Herald is actually pretty high. So normally if you're the Ash Zyra team, you don't want to rotate for Herald because ideally you want to extend the laning phase because you're going to deny enemy a ton of gold and you could take those plates. Well, I mean, Ash Zyra is kind of an isolation lane, right? It's kind of an it's a lane that you just want to set vision for and isolate. So your main goal with the Ash Zyra is when the enemy team takes Herald, you know, you're going to get vision for the enemy team. And when they go and take Herald, you make sure that you're in a position where you can punish as hard as you possibly can, so that these guys have to just give everything, right? And then in that case, that's a situation um, where where rotating for Herald is bad, right? But just to go back to the Renekton example, I think the Renekton example is more the LPL Renekton example is more important because having the Renekton as the bridge means that I don't okay, I delete having the Renekton as a bridge means that even if enemy bot lane gets ahead, if the bot lane is all about Ashe, Varus, Jhin, right? There's one thing that Renekton really does a good job of, which is smashing um, immobile AD carries in the mid game, and that means that the fact that they got their gold, their win condition is like an immobile AD carry, which your top laner by default counters, which makes it an effective bridge. But if you're playing an Ashe Zyra lane, the Ashe Zyra lane, you just sit there in the isolated 2v2 and you go and take it, and you go and dare the enemy team to go and start Herald. And if you know the enemy team is starting Herald, you can harass them on Herald. You can like hard trade for the Herald. You can just give them the Herald. It doesn't matter because the value of the gold and the opportunity cost for you moving is too much to make it worthwhile. So I did that answer the question?
Not exactly. I mean,
Okay.
my question was more about that. Well, okay, regardless of maybe whether you want to move your support from bottom or keep your
Mhm.
support there, your starting point is that you have to have you have to have bot pressure. Your starting
Yeah,
point is
of course.
bot pressure.
Yeah.
And so like talking more in general about like these good map setups, like mid game, whether you're going to move into one side together as a team and sort of be able to group there, or you're going to have one person, be the hedge and sort of distract people around the map. Do you think that the setup is dramatically changing, or do you think that the sort of basic steps, the first three steps, are consistently the same,
Okay.
and then it's just about like 4, 5, 6, etc.
Yeah. Okay. That's a fair question. I mean, Ash Zyra is not really very fair, right? Because you can get vision with Ash, but sure. Like the principle. I think the principle can still apply in the mid game because if you're playing an Ash Zyra lane in the mid game, normally, uh, I mean, it depends. It depends exactly on. So I mainly talked about early game in my in presentation today. But normally, if you're going to play Ash Zyra in the mid game, you don't normally want to sit on mid because if you sit your Ash Zyra on mid, there's potential that they're going to be flanked from both angles, right? So normally you want to play your Ash Zyra inside, which normally means you want to go and play 3-1-1, which normally means that your setup for what is essentially like it's a win condition / isolation play is very different from what happens if your setup is for a hedge play, right? Because generally, if your early game advantage um, is on your hedge champion, right, rather than your ISO champion, right, then your hedge champion doesn't need vision, right? Your hedge champion can play much more aggressively than your Ash Zyra lane, which is the other lane that you want to play through, right? Because it's a different type of strong side champion, right? Which needs more vision setup because you're not using yourself as a kind of a bait, right? That's the essential thing about hedge is a hedge is a bait so that you can cross map. Um, and an Ash Zyra isn't going to be a bait because if they commit 5 people into your lane and you don't know 5 people are coming, they're just going to kill you immediately. So the vision setups are different. And generally, how an Ash Zyra plays with a hedge versus how an Ash Zyra plays with a weak side containing champion is going to be different, right? And that's going to affect how your vision setup is going to be. But obviously, if you have the Ash Zyra, you're going to put the vision around your Ash Zyra, preferably playing a 3-1-1, but also potentially playing a 1-3-1-2. So I think the setup is different. But what really matters is which lane you're playing through in the early game. I mainly talked about early game today rather than mid game. The implication, obviously, being that you will always have early game priority, and the cost is how do you make the most out of this early game priority, right? Rather than drafting for scaling. Okay. Sorry if that didn't quite answer everything.
Good enough. Good enough.
Okay. Sorry about that. So Azoth, how do you approach dealing with emotional and confrontation players? In what sense? They have a rigid view on, I mean, just discuss theory, talk about it in one-to-one. I mean, it really depends. It really like each player is different. You know, normally I found that players are very rational if you show them evidence and make it a two-way dialogue, right? Be prepared to be wrong. I think one of the biggest things, one of the hardest things as a coach is just acknowledging that you're wrong. And all I can tell you is that I'm wrong multiple times every single day. Like, and it doesn't matter, right? You just be wrong, but be willing to be flexible, and make it a two-way conversation. Question regarding first example. Wait. Oh, so, okay, Zoo, go ahead and ask.
Hey, thanks, Peter. So just question regarding the first example. I noticed in that example, I don't remember off the top of my head. I was unsure what information that Wonder had exactly, like when the last time he saw support in jungle.
I'll
My
just bring it on the screen right now.
Oh, perfect, thank you.
Okay, so
So we see them
they
push
kind of see him
out.
back up. He could easily think that he could easily think that they're just basing, right?
Yeah.
When he's going for this aggressive play. But
Hmm.
I showed you the in the Damwon gaming, he did the same thing, right? Where they knew
Yeah.
Headroom was here, and so it's just something he does a lot of Renekton, right? And I
Yeah.
would say
So
that, yeah,
I totally agree with the preface of it, and that's something variable risk is something that we've talked about before too. And
yeah.
my question is regarding more about teaching it. I think if you have the information ahead of time that they're trying to punish you, so say for example in that long brush right there with the double red pink, say there was a blue ward instead, and he had
Mhm.
info that they were coming top. The way I like to explain that is trying not to waste resources. For example, in this one, he wasted flash and ult
Yep.
when they have the ability to cross map. Is that something that you value
Mm,
when you discuss this as well? Because if they're in position to cross map, junglers in zone A about to go zone B, and they can push out. This is something where maybe he can have a premeditated thought that he doesn't need to be using things like ult, things like flash.
yeah.
Um, Now, I know with
Uh,
incomplete information that could be difficult, but I'm talking more so about with complete information. He sees them for a fact moving top.
um. So if he knows for a fact, then the goal is to waste time, right? If it's a blue trinket, it's different, right? Because then he
Okay.
knows that they know that he's coming top, right? But if it's like a green trinket, say here, and then he sees them, then you want to encourage them to come top, but you want to
Hmm.
keep them interested long enough that they will keep coming top and not contest the mid. But here, obviously, he's using both of his cooldowns because he thinks he's going to escape, right?
Yeah, yeah.
He
So
just
that makes
wants to.
complete sense to me. It was just like, do you value, let's say in this exact play, he knows they were coming. Do you still value the flash and ult being used to waste that extra couple seconds to gain for his team on the opposite side of the map? Or would you rather him hold those spells, lose a couple seconds, but then be able to be proactive for, the cannon wave that's going to be coming afterwards, in a minute's time?
That's really on a case by case basis.
Okay.
Sorry, that's a bit of a cop out
No,
answer,
that's,
but
yeah, I was just trying to think about it a little bit more as like a sliding scale as opposed to
yeah,
just like the
you
black and white.
exactly, you're right. You're exactly right that it's sliding scale and it's extending the length of the play, right?
Okay.
So there's a value at some point, and this is something you guys have to go and work out with your own team, where that
Okay.
tempo advantage is worth it, right? And that depends on that depends on those
Gotcha. I
individual.
noticed at the collegiate, at least the collegiate level of play, I noticed that it's not that couple extra seconds really isn't usually worth.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm just trying to communicate like more consistency about like holding those sorts of spells. I know there's been discussion with that about flashing to survive in a losing fight and how it's not necessarily worth it and stuff like
Yeah,
that.
it depends. But the key point that I want to make clear from all of this play is number one, Olaf is inting by not hitting this tower,
Yeah, absolutely, I agree.
but also Senna and Tahm Kench. Like the fact that Senna and Tahm Kench exist in the game, even if they don't use any of it. So this is Tahm Kench before his nerf, right?
Hmm.
That the fact that they exist in the game means that you have to over allocate resources, and this is what TF and this is what champions like Ryze give, right? Because
Hmm.
even if they don't use their ult or like a Nocturne, you have to over allocate resources into this mid. So just by having a TF in the game or having a Nocturne in the game, every single one of your enemy's team's plays is going to cost more tempo because they have to allocate more resources because they have to worry about the global coming in at
Hmm.
any point. And the fact here that okay, so number one, that's why they have to allocate. Like this is why I think Graves is here. But also the key thing is that these guys aren't even thinking about coming top. There's no point where they even remotely come close, right? The first thing they
Yeah.
do is they just push the wave. Doesn't matter. You give up a guy. Doesn't matter. push in the mid wave, push in the bot wave, trade this tower for this tower. Renekton could respawn, catch this wave, and now you're ahead on the next play, right? Because
Yeah.
assuming you don't die. Okay.
All right, cool.
Makes sense.
Thank you.
Okay, question. If you need more clarity, I can unmute. Is it possible that champions can affect how you view a player's aggression? Using mid as an example, assassins generally more aggressive in the early game, which means that the probability from hidden information in the early game is far more likely to work out in their favor. Does this mean that playing assassins would be more impressive, or would playing an artillery be considered more impressive since there's smaller windows for them and lots of decisions based around? Okay, so I think that's the wrong way to think about it. I think that the assassin player that wants to all in. So a really good example to think about is Syndra versus Echo, right? Like Echo beats Syndra, but he has to play like a complete psychopath, right? Like he just has to all in all the time whenever he can, right? Because if Echo just plays the lane to scale, he's going to get like Syndra's just going to murder him, right? Syndra's just going to harass him out. So the setups that you need to play let's say let's compare Orianna versus Syndra to like Echo versus Syndra, right? Echo can beat the Syndra, but the resources that you need from your team in terms of either bridging resources or hedging resources, right, is much higher, right? So you can play the Echo into Syndra, and you can play like 3 pushing lanes or like 1 pushing lane, which is a hard pushing lane. Maybe preferably bot lane if you have an Echo, because then you can transfer your pressure from bot into mid. So the Echo can play really, really aggressively, and then if jungler plays to punish the Echo, then you can get the Echo back in the game with support roams, or you need bridging resources to make the Echo work. So I don't think it's about being more impressive, one being more impressive than the other. It's about needing different setups to balance the risk for the Echo to play the game how he wants to play, and being able to punish if the jungler just sits mid. And that can just be simply as much as picking a jungler which outscales really, really hard if he's not punished. It can be like a bot lane which hard wins the 2v2. It can be something like this, but it's about creating pockets where the Echo can do more things. And you can create a pocket of it's easier to do it on side lanes than it is to do it on mid, because the majority of pressure, like if you're playing on top lane, the only play that somebody can transfer pressure is they have to transfer pressure from mid into top. I guess unless support recalls from bot and comes and opens top, right? But generally you're transferring pressure. Mid lane you can have pressure transferred into you from both sides. Where side lanes you can only have pressure transferred into you from mid. So it's generally better to play higher risk, or like these kind of hedging things. Generally, you don't hedge in mid because you're under threat from both sides. So it's hard to cover every single gank angle. Like a top laner can just roam into mid. But also the cost for you failing in a hedging situation on mid is really, really expensive, because it's not just you that's punished, it's your side lane that's punished, right? Because the pressure is going to be transferred. Whereas if you hedge on top, right, and they gank top, then that means that that you have more time before the enemy team can threaten mid, right? So your jungler can immediately go mid and transfer into the other side. Whereas if you're trying to play aggressively on mid, your time to make a play on the side lanes is much reduced, because if you go for like an aggressive dive on the side lane when they've just ganked mid, they're going to come and collapse on you, right? So you better be sure you like blow them up immediately on the side. And the situations where the wave has to like literally be like, if you're playing to hedge on mid, like your bot lane wave better be like here, right, when the gank on mid happens, so that you can immediately dive them. Because if your wave is here and they gank mid, and you try to set up a slow push into dive, if you don't have TP on your mid, the first thing that they're going to do is come and gank here. This is going to end up in a freeze, and they're going to come and reinforce the freeze, right? So I think it's harder to do this kind of thing on mid than it is to do on side. If both jugglers decide to contest mid prior, how does the long-term losing team determine whether to be reactive to the enemy mid's jungle play or to make players on the other side? So you can't get. Just remember that every single time the jungle shows mid, like if you lose the 2v2 mid, you can always choose your jungler. So if your jungler shows mid, then enemy jungler can show on the other. You now know if you lose the 2v2 mid, it's often a bad idea to come and contest here. You should use your pressure here to get pressure bot, and then transfer to get priority later, or to one of the sides, right? So if you're the losing team, generally you want to try to get priority somewhere else responding to the enemy team's play. The problem is that often if you're the losing team, you don't have good vision control anywhere, right? So you don't know where enemy teams play. So often you're behind, you're a long way behind on the play because until the enemy jungler shows, you don't know where your winning play is, right? And that's one of the reasons why a champion like Sinjao or Volibear, which hard wins early, is so powerful in the hands of a strong team, right? Because he just won't show, and like the threat of him not showing means that this guy has to play much safer and be in a position to cross map. Sometimes, if the play is fast enough, you're not even going to have a chance to cross map. So if you're losing the 2v2 mid, the best way to do it is to play through side and normally through bot lane and make sure your support can make this losing 2v2 a 2v3. Could Ash Zyra get wave push and reset for a top slope? Yep, they could. Thank you very much. Okay, I hear a lot of weak side, strong side talk. So I think weak side, strong side is, so Pokemon Star 433. Weak side, strong side, I think is a completely useless way of talking about the game, right? To me, there's different kinds of strong side which you can have, and there's different kinds of weak side you can have. For me, the vocabulary of strong side is really useless because people don't know whether strong side means you picked strong early game champions, or whether you're playing through a side, so you're committing numbers into the early game, right? Because sometimes you're picking numbers to isolate, to bridge, right? A weak early game from one side. So, I mean, I think the term is super useless. So I don't know what to say about that. Sorry.
No, that's exactly the right answer. Thank you.
Okay, no problem. About drafting, how valuable is picking a champion who can be either bridge or hedge like Renekton? Is their bot lane picks good to hedging? So a thing about a hedging champion is generally hedging champions are played on strong side, but you can think of hedging as something a champion which requires enemy resources to shut down in the early game, but that isn't your primary win condition, right? So if you think about a draft that has Camille and Kalista, like say you've got Kalista Thresh, the Kalista Thresh can be an early game. It can be your snowball win condition, right? But Kalista Thresh normally falls off, right? And if your comp isn't well equipped to team fight around Kalista Thresh, and you just want to use that as an engage tool, then you can use, for instance, Kalista Thresh as a hedge lane. There's lots of Thresh lanes you can use as a hedge lane, like Thresh Varus, Thresh Ash is a bit there. But like something like Kalista Thresh is a really good example of a hedge lane because you force resources to be drawn into you, and if they just camp your Camille, then your Kalista Thresh is going to be super far ahead, and you can use your Kalista Thresh in the mid game to bridge, right? So that's an example. Normally, hedging is done when you win both sides. Now, obviously, if you win all three lanes, it's the best way to play the game, obviously, because everything is easy. But if you can't win mid, but you need to win both sides, but you win both sides, that's where hedging is really important, right? Because it's the threat that you're going to have control of over the wave if the enemy team makes a play on your other strong side. Okay, that's the way I think to think about hedging. If you think about it like that, then it becomes a bit more clear. So champions which let you play aggressively, but that can let you get out without scaling too well are good examples of hedging lanes. Kalista Thresh, really good example. Creativity, yeah, meta team dependent. Yep, that's correct. In response to the caller question, the expenditure sums would extend the tempo cost for the gank. Yes, they would. Also forcing the enemy team to allocate resources, right? Like if one of your flashes takes two of the enemy flashes, that means that a future situation you may be able to escape from, right? Speak. Okay, Lagella, go ahead. Ask your question if we still have time.
Yeah. Hi. So I read you said we could ask about some VODs. Can I show you something really quick?
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, I'll just ask for you to tell me if the stream is okay because I have a little bug in my Discord.
Okay.
I have to keep alt tabbing until it's okay.
Okay, I see it. Go ahead.
Okay, so I'll try to be quick. Right now it's game 1 of Liquid versus 100 Thieves, and both junglers are petting top, but Liquid doesn't know that. They don't have any information, and 100 Thieves didn't leash anywhere.
Yep.
So what I see they're doing is that they want to dive top. Of course, they have a Jace against an Ornn. They will get outscaled, but they are heavily outpushed bot. So here they recognize that 100 Thieves could be hedging, and Lee could actually go bot and dive bot, or make they lose waves if he shows top, and then he just does grow do does crux.
Yeah.
Is that assessment correct? Like the play would actually be to dive top if bot wasn't losing, and if so, if that is correct, how do you manage that? Like, they're hedging, but you still need to be aggressive. How do you manage that?
So I don't think this is hedging here. I think it's that they think that Ryze is going to TP and kill them if they try to go for the dive. Like I think they don't think they can pull off the dive. But
Mhm.
for sure, this is an example where you just take a small win, right? Like here, what TL do is that they hide in fog, right? So the cost there's a cost every time you go for a dive or you go for a gank or something like this. There's a cost associated, right? Which is your jungler has to show, and they just basically choose to keep their jungler hidden. Rather so that their bot lane is safe. I think is the best way to describe this. Would I call this hedging? I wouldn't really call this hedging. Because hedging is more about allowing, like, if the Ornn now suddenly just all in the Jace, right? Because they have he would die against it. I don't think this is an example. I think this is an example of just playing like the thing I don't have a term for, right? This is just like this is playing for ISO, right? Like you're trying to, by taking this camp right now that you're showing on your screen, this means that Lee Sin has to waste resources staying top if he wants to stay top. So Lee Sin has to play into bot, which is a way of kind of tracking Lee Sin over the long term, right? Because Sin after taking this is going to ace go bot, and he's protected the Jace from a potential freeze, and he's denied Lee Sin resources. So I don't think this is really hedging. If that makes sense. I think it's just them not being in a position where they can go for the aggressive play because of their conditions of their champions.
Okay, I see that.
Okay. Let me go next. Okay. Sorry. I'll try to make this really fast. Okay. Question: what are some simple ways to generate a tempo advantage from behind if there are any? Fewer lanes than the enemy team. If the enemy team is playing 3 lanes and you're playing 2, or enemy team is playing 2 lanes or you're playing 1, this means that you can generate isolated pockets of tempo advantage, right? So am I still streaming? I think I'm still streaming. Yeah, I'm still streaming. Okay. So imagine if you just group mid as 5 as blue team and enemy team has 4 mid, right? You have the opportunity to get a tempo advantage, but that advantage will only exist until you're forced to come and respond to your side lanes, right? Because pushing 5v4 normally can't dive normally, because normally you need multiple numbers advantage. So here that means that eventually, if this guy keeps split pushing, you're going to have to respond to this at some point, right? But until in the pocket where it takes the guy to push away from here into here, you have some amount of tempo advantage, right? But it's not a permanent tempo advantage, and it's not across the entire map. Sorry. Yeah, Kuma. So I'm sorry if that didn't cover the full question. I just kind of want to get it through as many as I can. What's your thought on risk reward decisions regarding dead tempo lane assignments? What I mean by dead tempo, situation where there are no neutral objectives, no chance. I think that can be good. Like, I mean, assuming do you mean assuming tier 2 towers are down? Uh, Yep. I mean, I think that's good, right? To be clear, and I think we can talk. So I don't want to go into freezing too much. But I think one thing that people generally overlook with freezing is a term of resource denial, right? So if you have carry versus carry top, and you freeze this wave after tier 1 tower is taken, you're not actually denying enemy top laner, right? Like people think, oh, the top lane is frozen, so enemy top carry, this is really good for red team carry because enemy blue team is being denied. Actually, that's not what's happening. Blue team, if they see you freezing, they can choose this guy, or this guy to get denied. And if they're playing something like Lulu mid or Morgana mid or something which is low resource, or they're playing like an AD carry that doesn't need that many resources because it's a utility AD carry, you can actually put yourself behind if you freeze, because they can put their carry on the other side, and this guy is going to push the wave and get access to these jungle camps, right? So what you're actually doing is you're denying resources of whoever the blue team chooses. Now, if the blue team's really bad and they've never played against freezing before, they can just choose to have their most valuable character just get denied. I'm not going to talk about freezing too much, right? But basically, freezing has situations where it can be good, but it's about thinking about how you want to allocate your resources, right? And sometimes there's everyone on the enemy team needs resources, including the enemy jungle, in which case, great, it's super good, right? But here, blue team gets to choose. So the thing you're describing about PSG is something I've noticed as well, and I think it's really smart, right? It's that the utility champion often has the most escape tools, and you put your carrier champion farming these camps where he can do it safely. And this guy's essentially cheating, but it's much easier. This like whoever the top lane is, the guy who's cheating, it's much easier for the guy who's cheating to get away if he's like one of your bridge or your hedge champions, right? Rather than your primary carry. So I think this is actually a good thing to talk about, and PSG are a really good team. For talking about. Yep. Okay. Go ahead. Go ahead, Vega.
Yeah, I mean, first, I just want to say thank you for doing this, because not many people do stuff like this, and I think it's really good. My question is just like you mentioned in Syndra versus Echo matchup that Echo needs to get like bridged right and get help.
Yep.
But my problem with that is I think that, so if we look from draft, Echo is getting picked into the Syndra.
Mhm.
So there are other people blind picking, meaning you'll be losing in other places. So what ends up happening to a lot of people is that they either get forced into helping him at bad timers,
Mhm.
or he doesn't get any help. And what do you think? Like, how does this get fixed? Because to me, it always just seems like every Echo that plays into Syndra does not know how to play Echo versus Syndra 1v1, and then they end up needing help, but they can't get help because the other people blind picked for him to get counter picked.
Yep. I mean, I'm gonna say that I don't think everyone should pick Syndra into Echo. The Echo into Syndra, sorry. I don't think like that's a perfect example of a champion which you better know the matchup. Like people see that Echo can be picked into Azir or Echo can be picked into Syndra. Same with LeBlanc actually. LeBlanc into Azir, right? This is a matchup where you better know the matchup really well, because if you need additional resources, you're gonna have that as your counter pick. And if you're the guy with the counter pick, either somebody is sacrificing themselves really hard for you, or you need to be able to find your pockets. Like, so for me, it's about the main thing about Echo versus Syndra is you can't play super aggressive all the time unless somebody is sacrificing themselves for you. I mean, and normally with Echo, that's normally what's happening. Normally the top laner is sacrificing, because normally with Echo, you want to play 1-4. Or you can play 1-3-1, but normally Echo's played in 1-4, with the Echo just being the primary win condition. So normally the top laner is the guy who sacks, but you can play 1-3-1 with Echo. But generally Echo's better in 4-1s for that reason. But the thing about Echo is normally it's about picking your moments to go aggressive, and that's why normally, even though Echo can always all in Syndra all the time, actually the best Echoes that I've seen normally bounce the wave, allow it to come here, allow it to semi-freeze, or like slow push back, and pick their moment, pick their wave. They understand that they're going to have to push in the wave at some point, and they're really good at picking which wave to push in without costing their team additional resources. But to me, the team, if you want to play Echo into Syndra, your jungler has to either somebody has to sacrifice for you because you're counter picking on red side, or your jungler has to be like really, or you have to have a good level 1 plan or something, so that you can or a really good jungler at tracking enemy jungle, so that you can so that you have your pockets of aggression with the where Echo can play like he wants. It's one of the reasons why I really like Echo with Ashe, right? Because then you can play like a psychopath all you want without giving the cost. But I agree with you, like 100%. I'm generally not as much of a favor of in favor of that matchup, or into Azir especially, like into Azir as well, unless you like have a specific plan for being able to do it. So I agree. yeah. So sorry, was that the only part of the question?
Yeah, I mean, it was basically just that. Like, it's just an awkward counter pick, in my opinion, because
Yeah,
you
I
don't actually really win, and you need so much resources. But because of how draft went, you like really have those resources.
I fully agree with you, but I will say that I've worked with many mid laners who like Echo, and having that discussion is always fun. Uh, next question. Does Kale or Castin count as a good hedge laner because they need to be put behind by the opponent? Only top. GP is a good. So for what you're describing as a hedge laner that needs to be put behind by OP, something like Ziggs or something like GP is a really good example. I wouldn't say Kale or Cassidin because those are quite something else. But a good example is a GP because if you try to play away from not GP first. Oh, although GP is pretty strong first 3 levels, right? But like generally, GP with ult up is a good example because if you try to cross map bot, he's just going to ult bot, right? So, and that means that your play bot is going to be either delayed by one wave or delayed by a lot of time. So you're generally forced to play into the GP lane. Since I had a lot of VODs here of EG doing stuff into Cloud9, one of the things which I appreciate that Cloud9 did in playoffs is they picked a lot of GP, and that was very good against this style of play. Hedges and bridges accomplish similar things in opposite ways. Yes, that's exactly the point, right? Like hedges and bridges, like a hedge is about playing really, really aggressively to draw pressure to your lane, whereas bridge is about playing aggressively to transfer your pressure, right? Yeah, it's two sides of the same coin, but they achieve the same things in opposite ways. They're not generally your hedges and bridges are generally not your primary win condition, although they can be your primary win condition. Like if you're playing with Renekton as a hedge, right, and they just camp your bot lane, then you can use the Renekton as your primary, but you don't go into the game with it as your primary. And I think that's the key thing. Whereas a bridge is normally something that isn't your primary win condition under any circumstances, right? Like a bridge is normally something like Kled or something, which you, with the Kled, you'll go Kled mid, where you want to use your Kled mid to transfer pressure into the sides. And it doesn't matter how far behind you get when you're doing it. Yeah. Black Gator, go ahead.
Hello. Thank you for this opportunity. I'm just gonna screen share.
Okay.
Now you should be able to see. I just want to talk about this right here. So like it's about teaching early game aggression, and I feel like I work in like ERL, like primary league level of play, and I have a lot of times there's like opportunities to deny top, and especially like forcing the enemy to. You talked about like the forcing decisions from the enemy, and he's like the prime example where like a rumble puffed up top, and there's like no way for like TS to really dive bot because of like LS Avaris. And what they do is like they have mid prio and they dive top to force the TP. And the first time it doesn't like really super work out, but they already denied like a wave of Jingtian.
Yeah.
And the second time they do it, it's like Rumble goes back to, I'm gonna speed up a little bit so everyone can see this. Like Karsh is taking this and they go back to mid and they rinse and repeat that. And I feel like this is something that I don't really see very often teams doing, especially like in regional leagues, where I feel like it should be done. And what do you think about it? And like, how does this fit into what you think about teaching early game aggression? Like, there's like coming a second dive in a couple of minutes, so they force mid pro again.
Yeah, can I talk whilst the VOD? Like, you don't need to fast forward the VOD. I'm looking in the background, but
Yeah.
but I mean, in this kind of thing,
Yeah.
I think this is more about. Just leave it playing, just so that I can see the. Okay, second dive. So, okay, no, I remember this game. Yeah. So they're here. They're just denying resources, and the problem here is what's going on in bot side, right? Because here, in order for this, like they're kind of leaving their Lee Sin out to dry because they're not making a play on the bot side. Maybe you can say that the thing that top gets in exchange is that they got farm on Diana, right? So, but Diana, if the enemy team is playing in this kind of a way, Diana had better like, so if you excuse my
Yeah.
pardon my sorry, like he better fucking like help his
Yeah,
team, right? Like,
do
because I
something.
mean, here his Lee Sin is getting murdered for his 6.
Yeah.
So I agree with you. But often, sometimes you can use the fact that you're getting punished early to to bridge for somebody else. And I will just say that that this Lee Sin thing is interesting. You bring up Lee Sin because actually I think that because we talked about Renekton here, but I will
Yeah.
tell you that Lee Sin, when Lee Sin was strong, was like
Yeah.
the best hedge champion in the entire game because you could just wave clear forever, and it's really hard for them to do. It's even better than it was just like Renekton but better. But I agree with you here. Like what they're choosing to do instead is to get Diana to 6, and that's just how their comp works. But
Yeah.
obviously, you could bounce that in exchange for the first gank top. What you could do is you could bounce away bot and just hold a freeze, and
Yeah,
then
exactly. Like, so like this is what you were saying. Like, it's not like, oh, they just ignore top and leave him out to dry. It's like what they do in response on the other side of the map could have been better. Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
So this here, you can actually argue that their bot lane is kind of autopiloting a bit here, right? Because they can get much more than what they do for this.
Yeah.
Because their bot lane got nothing from this, right? They got
Yeah.
like so
This is like, yeah, go ahead.
yeah, but here I can guarantee you that the default is to go and say what's Lee Sin doing, right? Why is he like inting? But actually it's his bot lane who's not getting enough, right?
Yeah, that's
And
what I'm saying.
Yeah. No,
Like,
I
it's not only EDG is playing well to deny. It's also like they are choosing not to do something on the other side of the map, which could have been done. Yes, I see the point that it's like hard to dive Alistair early on, like, but the Alistair is like half HP or like 25% HP. You can at least force them away from the wave, and that's something that should have been done, in my opinion.
No, I agree with you. No, I agree. And I think that's a good example. Vega, Kalen Castin can many times. Yes, okay. You are correct that Kalen Castin can many times win in the 1v1. I was just. I mean, you're correct that Kalen Castin. They are 1v1 matchups that Kalen Castin win. I'm just working on the assumption that he meant as a scaling example to draw into the lane. But yes, there are lanes where Castin can still win the 1v1 and still outscale. Yeah, I agree with you. Okay, so lots of discussion. This is good. Okay, so I'm on Bearman. Could Thresh or similar be considered hedge champ, even though it's more? Yes, Thresh is a very, very good example of a hedge champ. Normally, the best way to recognize what a hedge champ is a champion that has a really strong early game, kind of falls off a bit mid to late, but provides something even if it's behind, right? And Thresh is a very good example of it. So Thresh is a good example for bot lane. Thresh is good, Ziggs is good, Trist is good in some matchups because Trist can hit the tower, right? So you can commit hard resources into top, and if you roam with your support away from a Trist, then the Trist can hit the tower if Trist wins a 1v1. But Thresh, perfect example. Okay, I guess he's good night. Okay, so people say good night. I'm just trying to have a okay, so there you go. Okay, I guess that's it. Oh, Crusher. Final okay, 2 more questions. I'm gonna answer the final 2 questions and then we'll call it. So go ahead, Crusher.
Hey, good night. I want to talk a bit about Jizuki because you've been speaking a bit about him because maybe he has been a bit unfairly criticized for his int plays. But I want to get a bit of your perspective, and if I put you on the spot and you don't feel comfortable answering, completely understand. But well, from my point of view, it doesn't seem like anyone needed to teach Jizuki aggression. It's always something that he was very aggressive, and it turns him into a very annoying player to play against. But at the same time, because if you take examples from even the same games, it doesn't seem completely clear that he understands his times when to be aggressive. It just seems that he will almost play aggressive regardless. And I think what EG managed to do was, for example, compared to past splits, they adapted very well to his type of playstyle. So now when enemy teams are trying to punish him, as you could see on even the Cloud9 scenario that you showed. I think teams, for starters, are punishing him in a bad way because they are wasting too many resources. But EG seems more ready than before to go for the cross map plays, to go for the trade plays. Sorry, for the trade plays. But it seems that he would almost do it regardless. I'm not sure.
I mean, I think it's just if you want to play for aggressive early game, that's how you have to play, right? You can't take every 100% decision. And naturally having a player like Chizuke in your team leans you towards early game, but obviously I'm not going to say that, like, obviously Chizuke modified his style of play as well, right? So the difference between Chizuke in spring and Chizuke in summer is in summer he almost never got caught in the side lane for nothing. Maybe his trade wasn't worth it, you know, maybe he would get caught and you wouldn't be able to get something cross map. But I think that the big thing about Chizuke in summer is that his team played better around him and he picked his moments to go aggressive. Like I showed the Orianna game because that was a good example from spring where he was still working out how to coordinate with his team. And so he died on those Orianna plays, right? One time he died and one time he didn't die. But those were both high risk plays because the team isn't in a position to cross map, right? So I think that's the key thing. But always these things are team decisions, right? And I think Chizuke has said in an interview himself, if he is playing aggressive and nobody else in his team is playing aggressive, then he's the one who's inting, right? And it's a decision you have to make as a team. And sometimes you can enforce it as a coach, but in the real world, you cannot enforce what you want as the only time you can enforce as a coach is when you're building your roster, right?
It does seem like a dream player when you're playing from behind, though.
Yeah, I mean,
because
so,
it forces the enemy team into so many decisions that would normally not be happening. Because for me, Jizuke gameplay reminds me a little bit as how G2 would play as a team, where they would constantly force the enemy team to make multiple decisions at the same time. It's just that G2 played more like a team in that sense, and there was some incredible games. I think there's no like coincidence that Chizuke is very good on Rise because it's a champion that really forces enemy teams to make those decisions. And yeah, it reminds me a little bit of that G2 that even with 10k gold behind, not like the Met from this year where they will just out team fight people, but they will just completely outplay on the map and make games super difficult to play against them.
No, and I agree, and I think that's why that's one of Chizuke's great strengths as a player, for sure. Fair enough. No, I agree with you. Sorry, I don't want to move on.
No problem. Thank you very much.
No, I agree with you. Quick question: what type of changes in general affects a champion's ability to hedge effectively? Could Fizz be considered a more effective hedge champion with the passive changes? Potentially. The problem with Fizz though, versus Renekton, is Fizz has no wave control. So because Fizz's wave control is so bad, he's probably easier to punish on because you can stack waves into him and then dive him so that he's never able to hedge effectively. So I think potentially in a world like Fizz could be, but it's really the problem is he has no wave control, so it's kind of hard to do it. But think about hedging as in something like a Renekton, something like a Mordekaiser at 6, GP at 6, like these other champions that Aatrox, right? These champions which if you just play into them, you don't get the full value out of the champion, right? Because if you're just like again, 2021 is different, but 2020 Renekton, if you play into 2020 Renekton and all you're doing is snowballing the Renekton at the expense of the rest of your map, you're going to lose the game, right? Unless you play flawlessly. And that's kind of snowballing a hedge champion is about it being the backup plan, not the primary plan. Okay, so that's kind of way to think. Okay, so thank you all for attending today, guys. If you're going to record that, I apologize to Jojo. I didn't want to show that, but he was just having a rough day in scrims today. I didn't mean for that to go onto stream. But yeah, he ran it a bit in scrims today. But I mean, he's normally really good in scrims. So I hope that nobody uses that against him too badly.
I'll make sure it's removed from the VOD.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. But that was my bad. Yep. Thank you, everyone. I hope that you enjoyed this. Maybe if there's more interest, I could do maybe one more this year, but I have to be a bit careful because You know, a lot of these examples, if you've talked to me in the past, maybe we've already discussed some of these examples before, but I had to be a bit careful about what I can share from EG's perspective. But thank you all for attending. Feel free to leave any follow-up questions that you think about here, or put something in general chat and I'll get back to you.